So the nature of the divine, right, or of God in particular, kind of boils down to six particular traits, right? And by themselves, we can puzzle over what each of these particular traits means. But it's not until we get into their confluence, how they interact with each other, that we really start to see some of the potential, uh, or arguably logical problems of these traits together and as individual traits, just how incomprehensible perhaps some of them are. Uh, so the six principal traits of God are his omnipotence, his omniscience, his omnibenevolence, uh, being eternal and infinite, which sometimes are taken together. Those two are sometimes taken together to pose as his omnipresence, and we'll address that briefly. And then his transcendence. Right? Uh, so omnipotence is just a Latin way of saying all powerful, and omniscience is just the Latin way of saying all knowing, and omnibenevolent or omnibenevolence is just saying all good, right? So perfectly, in place of all, you can place the word perfectly instead. So perfectly powerful, perfectly knowing, perfectly good, right? And then his eternality, the eternality of God, is the idea that God is not within space time, right? So he's not restricted to the flow of time, because anything that's restricted or confined to the flow of time is not eternal, right? It's not everlasting, and God has to be everlasting, right? Uh, and then his infinite nature means that he's unlimited, right? He's not bound by physical constraints. So these two taken together, that God exists not within space-time, or rather at all times simultaneously, right? Um, rather than being stuck within the flow of time, and that God is not limited by space, right? He's unlimited, so he's not just in all wins. He's not just at any win. He's at anywhere. He's anywhere, everywhere, and every win, right? So these two together make up the idea of God's omnipresence, which is the idea that he's present in all times and places. But, the idea of omnipresence being a joint or an individual trait, and, is more debated theologically, and also in terms of in terms of philosophically, right? And in terms of philosophy, the idea of him being all times and all places really boils down to those two separate features of eternality and infinitude. Right? And then lastly, the idea of God's transcendence, right? Which is kind of also there with the idea of omnipresence. That he is above all, so he exists outside of the universe, but also within all. Right. So that philosophical distinction's an important one when separating it out from the idea of infinitude or eternality. Right. It comes out from those two, but it's also a separate trait. Right. So when taken together, as I mentioned before, these traits of God do pose for a few major philosophical issues, right? Uh, and these are issues that you will see both theists debate and atheists refer to, or, non-theists refer to, for why they don't believe in God, or at least a personal God, if they're, say, Hindu or Buddhist or a Taoist or something like that.